Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle, and this is my week 2 wrap-up for Jane Austen July. Now, we are in like a heat warning day. It feels like minus 39, so it's very hot here. And so the air conditioning's on, and I hope that's okay. I don't think it's gonna be too loud, but I just thought I'd better explain that in case you're wondering what that mild rumbling is in the background. Okay, I have a lot of books to discuss in this video, so I'm just going to dive straight into it. But first, I'm actually going to talk about the watch challenges, because I've watched a whole bunch of Jane Austen adaptations this past week, mostly because I'm preparing for a video coming up where I am going to rank my Jane Austen movie and TV adaptations, which has been proving to be really fun. And so these are all, except for the very first one, they are all rewatches, because I wanted to remind myself of what I thought about these movies and where I would rank them. But the very first one that I watched was actually From Prada to Nada. I found it on Netflix. I think I heard in somebody else's video that it was a Sense and Sensibility retelling, and I had no idea. So when I found it on Netflix, I thought I would give it a try. It's set in modern day California. They're in Los Angeles, and the family is an American family originally from Mexico, and I really liked that. And it was actually not that bad of an adaptation. I could totally see the plot of Sense and Sensibility play out. I thought it was pretty good, so I did enjoy that one. And then I did a rewatch of the 1996 Emma with Gwyneth Paltrow. It had been years since I had seen that one, and I'd forgotten just how delightful it is. I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow, she's just charming, you know, and Jeremy Northam as Mr. Knightley was great, and I thought the two of them were a really good pair. And I'm a big fan of Toni Collette, so having her be Harriet Smith worked for me. I just like that movie adaptation. I think they did a really good job, and I was just reminded that it's a delightful adaptation. And then I rewatched Love and Friendship. I love that movie. Okay, I love that movie. It's the movie adaptation of her novella Lady Susan. And it's so great because it's so different from all of her other works. And I'm going to be talking about this in an upcoming video, because I'm just about to start a reread of Lady Susan. But it is an epistolary novel, so it's interesting that that's difficult to translate into a movie. But I thought they did a really good job. They had nods to the fact that it was an epistolary novel, in that periodically they had text on the screen, and there was also a lot about letters. You know, people writing letters, people reading letters, people receiving letters. They made that a key thing in the movie, and I thought that was great. I just liked it. I thought it was well done, and the cast was great, and I love the guy who plays Sir James Martin. He is hilarious. I loved how they chose to play his character, because, I mean, yes, he is a fool, no question about it. But with that grin on his face all the time, he's just so happy with life that I can't help but like him, and I laugh every time he opens his mouth. I laugh. And so that was a really fun rewatch. I also rewatched Austenland, which is based on a novel by Shannon Hale. And again, I love this one too. It's about a girl in the States who is like the biggest Jane Austen fan, and she spends all of her money to go on this trip to England, to Austenland, where you live in the Regency era, and it's just a delight. I really like that one as well. And then I also did a rewatch of Bride and Prejudice. Again, this was mostly for my ranking video, to remind myself. And although I don't tend to watch Bollywood movies, this one just works for me. It's a great modern day retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but it is just so colorful and exuberant. And I really did like that, although there were times where I was a little bit overstimulated with all of the color and the music and the dancing, but it was just, it's fun to watch. So those are the adaptations that I have watched. And now I'm going to talk about the books that I finished this week. I finished Celebrating Pride and Prejudice, 200 Years of Jane Austen's Masterpiece by Susannah Fullerton. This book was fantastic. I really, really, really liked this book. Now, there's a few things, and I'm not sure, a few things I wanted to highlight from this read. She has a number of chapters where she talks about all of the characters, and so one of them is Delighting in the Ridiculous, Other Characters. So she has a chapter on Elizabeth Bennet's relations and a chapter on Darcy's relations, and then other characters. And so from that chapter, there was the section on Lady Catherine. Oh, sorry, this is his relations. This is Darcy's. The section on Lady Catherine was really, really good. Lady Catherine has various functions within the novel. She illustrates pride in its worst excesses. She feels no real affection for her nephew, only pride in his wealth and estate. Her pride is damaging to herself and others. It is of the ridiculous variety. We laugh at Lady Catherine's absurd pronouncements. Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted? She demands to know. Readers must compare her obnoxious pride with that of her nephew. He too has worried that marriage to Elizabeth might be a degradation to his name and lineage, and has to be taught to banish such mistaken pride. But his aunt will never learn to correct hers. She sent him language so very abusive, this is a quote, especially of Elizabeth, that for some time all intercourse was at an end. To the last, she thinks Pemberley a polluted place. In Lady Catherine, Jane Austen shows that pride, where there is no superiority of mind, can be a serious fault, whereas Darcy has the superiority and regulation to eventually soften his pride into a virtue. Like the monster in a fairy tale, Lady Catherine is an obstacle to the path of true love. She tries to foist her own daughter upon Darcy as a wife. And then Lady Catherine also brings balance to Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth is overburdened with awful relations. Darcy needs some on his side so that he cannot grow too complacent. His aunt and cousin Anne amply redress this imbalance. Darcy is shamed by his aunt's ill breeding and has to occasionally pretend not to hear her, just as Elizabeth must blush for or ignore Mrs. Bennet's vulgarities. I thought that was really, really interesting. Okay, a couple other things that I noted here. In the chapter on Did They All Live Happily Ever After? Sequels and adaptations. The Jane Austen sequels are a fascinating phenomenon. And I mentioned this briefly in my video for my library book haul, about the variety that's out there in Jane Austen retellings and adaptations. I'll link it in the cards. Dickens is a great and much-loved novelist, but no writer has written of the post-marital affairs of David and Agnes Copperfield, or told the tale of what sort of adult young Oliver Twist grew up to be. Emily Bronte's Heathcliff and Cathy are safely left dead, and while the occasional author has created afterlives for the citizens of Barsetshire, Trollope's characters have generally been left unpoached by later novelists. Why does Jane Austen have such irresistible appeal to modern writers? Is it because, as William, and I can't pronounce his last name, speculates, she has an unsurpassed ability to make us feel as if we know her characters as well as we know the people in our own lives? They're friends of ours. No wonder we want to keep gossiping about them. All right, and then in this same chapter, she's got a section on murder mysteries. According to P.D. James, doyen of detective fiction, if Jane Austen were alive today, she would be writing murder mysteries and doing it brilliantly. P.D. James is not alone in introducing murder and other crimes into a Pride and Prejudice sequel. A survey of female readers in Britain carried out in 2011 identified Mr. Darcy as the literary character most women wanted to meet, preferably romantically. But out of the next 6 heroes chosen, 5 were detectives or solvers of crime. This included Inspector Morse, Sherlock Holmes, and James Bond. This means that those sequel writers who combine Darcy and crime are working with an appealing mix. Alright, and in that same chapter, she's got a section on chick lit and Regency romances. Georgette Heyer is by far the best writer of the Regency romance, and she is sometimes called the 20th century Jane Austen. But she knew that witty and accurate as her own novels were, she was not in the same class at all. When a fan once wrote to say that she had been wading through Pride and Prejudice and that it was like a Georgette Heyer book but with too much padding, Heyer tore up the letter in disgust. Alright, one more. She's got a chapter on bonnets and bosoms, film and theatrical versions. No BBC period drama has ever been so popular as the 1995 Pride and Prejudice. When the last episode was screened in Britain, motorways were jammed with people desperate to get home in time to watch Elizabeth marry Mr. Darcy. Thousands of viewers who had never read the novel, poor things, phoned the BBC asking for assurance that there would be a happy ending for hero and heroine. The video, released midway through screening, sold out in the first 2 hours, and the novel started selling 20,000 copies per week in Britain. Yeah, this was fantastic. So if you can get yourself a copy of this, maybe your library has it too. It is a really fun read. Okay, let's dive into the children's books. I read the children's books that I'd gotten from the library, and the first one that I read was A Guinea Pig, Pride and Prejudice. This is seriously the most adorable thing I have ever read. So these are photographs of real guinea pigs dressed in costumes. Someone made the costumes for all. This is a dramatis personae, all the characters and the guinea pigs who play them. Adorable. And so they have, you know, it's a very abridged version, obviously, of the story, but Volume 1, Netherfield. And so they have the abridged version of the story here with a picture and a quote from the book beside it. And it is seriously just the most adorable, adorable thing I have ever seen. This is Bingley and Jane. It is just so cute. And look, Mr. Wickham. I loved this so much. And then I read the Emma, an emotions primer, which was also really cute. Mr. Weston is surprised. Let's see. Mr. Elton is angry. This is great. For toddlers, an emotions primer, this is great. Jane Fairfax is tired. So yeah, that was really cute. And then the Pride and Prejudice counting primer was also just really adorable. 2 rich gentlemen, 6 horses, 9 fancy ball gowns, and then this was my favorite, 10,000 pounds a year. And then Goodnight, Mr. Darcy was also just really cute. In the great ballroom there was a country dance and a well-played tune, and Elizabeth Bennet. And Lydia and Kitty, who were sure they looked pretty. Yeah, this was a great parody on Goodnight Moon. And then finally I read Brave Jane Austen, Reader, Writer, Author, Rebel by Lisa Pliscou, illustrated by Jen Coracy? I'm not sure. This was a great introduction for children into Jane Austen. The information in here was solid, good end papers. I'm not convinced, however, I like the illustrations except for the people. I'm not entirely sure what I think of the people. Let me get to a better page where there's people. But this part was great. There was, I loved this page, and they only did this once, I think, but these illustrations I could get behind. This was fantastic. And then there was great information at the end of the story. The Life and Times of Jane Austen. And then here from the pen of Jane Austen, you know, she has, you know, quotes from her letters and her books. Handsome is as handsome does. He is therefore a very ill-looking man. That's a letter she wrote to Cassandra. So yeah, this was a fun read as well. And then I also read Jane Was Here, an illustrated guide to Jane Austen's England, which was just so fun and charming. I mean, look at these end papers. This was written by Nicole Jacobsen, Devynn Dayton, and Lexi K. Nilson. And it was just fun. They talked about the places where Jane Austen lived, and also places that were settings in the film and TV adaptations. So on these 2 pages, we have what you'll see and what you'll need. And there's like the normal stuff, you know, but then there was also, this was hilarious, a Darcy cardboard cutout for heightened immersive experience. All right, and then they had this section here of some quotes from her letters to Cassandra, her sister, which cracked me up. There were only 12 dances, of which I danced 9, and was merely prevented from dancing the rest by the want of a partner. Why did you dance 4 dances with so stupid a man? Why not rather dance 2 of them with some elegant brother officer who was struck with your appearance as soon as you entered the room? I mean, you just get this great look into her humor and personality through these letters. I sent you a letter yesterday. It was not very long or very witty, and therefore, if you never receive it, it does not much signify. Fantastic. I read The Intrigue at Highbury or Emma's Match by Carrie, Bebris. So this is the next up for me in the Mr. and Mrs. Darcy series. I love this series. This is so great, and I love that they went to Highbury and we got all the characters from Emma in this one. This one was also told slightly differently to her others, and I was all about it. So there was a prologue where Darcy and Elizabeth are on their way to visit some friends, and they get robbed late at night, and they're just outside of Highbury. And then volume the first, in which is related a succession of curious incidents originating a fortnight previous in the village of Highbury. And so volume the first is actually all told from the perspective of Mr. and Mrs. Knightley, which is great. Like, so far in the past with these books, they've all been told from the perspective of Mr. and Mrs. Darcy. To get that slight change in perspective for a portion of the book was great, but then when Mr. and Mrs. Darcy show up in the village, it then goes back to their perspective, and they are celebrating the marriage of Jane and Frank Churchill, and the uncle, Mr. Churchill, is there, and he dies at the dinner that Mr. and Mrs. Darcy are hosting, and it was fantastic. This is chapter 1 in the book, and I loved this. Emma Woodhouse Knightley, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, a happiness recently compounded by her marriage to a gentleman of noble character and steadfast heart, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 22 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. Which of course is a play on the first line of Emma. So that was fantastic. And then I also finished my annotated version of Pride and Prejudice. This was such a great reread. I love this story so much, and my enjoyment was definitely heightened by having the annotated version. I learned a lot of really interesting things, and I've got just a few things to highlight for you here. So this is the 3rd volume, so there's going to be spoilers here. I mean, there's been spoilers throughout this video. I probably should have said. This is when she just finds out that Lydia has run off with Wickham, and she's still up north. It says, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner had hurried back in alarm, supposing by the servant's account that their niece was suddenly taken ill. But satisfying them instantly on that head, she eagerly communicated the cause of their summons, reading the 2 letters aloud and dwelling on the postscript of the last with trembling energy. Several phrases, and this is the annotation now, several phrases in this paragraph, for example, wild to be at home, misery of her impatience, trembling at energy, tears of gratitude, call attention to the intensity of Elizabeth's emotional capacity, an important aspect of her character. Although she cultivates a witty facade and wants to be seen as a rational being, although she is emphatically a rational being, Austen represents her also as a woman of strong feelings. Indeed, her outrage at Charlotte's marital choice, in contrast with Jane's mild acceptance, indicates the same thing. The love for Darcy that she is beginning to recognize will turn into a passionate commitment. So I thought that was interesting. You know, we all, you know, are aware of Elizabeth being a rational being, but she also has very deep feelings as well. And then in the last volume, this is towards the end now, when Bingley has just come back to Netherfield with Darcy. Let's see. And they go to walk off together. They lagged behind while Elizabeth, Kitty, and Darcy were to entertain each other. Very little was said by either. Kitty was too much afraid of him to talk. Elizabeth was secretly forming a desperate resolution, and perhaps he might be doing the same. And the annotation is this: only occasionally does Austen's narrator pretend not to know what's going on in a character's mind. The perhaps in this sentence is a deliberate tease of the reader. And I thought that was interesting because I think it only happens twice in the book where the narrator pretends not to know what's going on in a character's mind. And then the last paragraph of the book, with the Gardiners, they were always on the most intimate terms. Darcy, as well as Elizabeth, really loved them, and they were both ever sensible of the warmest gratitude toward the persons who, by bringing her into Derbyshire, had been the means of uniting them. I love Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. They are some of my favorite characters in this story. I really, really like them. And here's the annotation. The distance between the novel's famous first sentence and this final one calls attention to the kind of success that the marriage of Elizabeth and Darcy most significantly represents. It is, of course, a fairy tale marriage. Prince Charming, with a castle and immense wealth, whisks away the beautiful maiden. More importantly, it is a marriage of true feeling. The first sentence of Pride and Prejudice suggests the view of marriage as a business transaction held by Mrs. Bennet and Charlotte, among others. Single man plus fortune equals, in the eyes of the community, need for a wife. The last sentence speaks of feeling, of love reaching outward, of warmest gratitude. It occurs at the end of an account suggesting how Darcy and Elizabeth build a community around themselves, a community based not on convention but on affective ties. Elizabeth has escaped not only her mother's commercialism, but her father's cynicism. So there you have it, Pride and Prejudice. Now, just a couple books that I'm still reading. I'm making good headway with The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, and I fully expect to be finished this by next week, so I will save talking about this until that wrap up. I am also still working my way through The Genius of Jane Austen by Paula Byrne, her love of theater and why she works in Hollywood, and Behind Closed Doors at Home in Georgian England by Amanda Vickery. So there you have it. That's what I've been reading and watching this week. Have you read any of these books? Let's chat in the comments down below. Also, let's chat about the film and TV adaptations as well. Have you seen them? What are your thoughts? You know I love to talk with you in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.